Welcome back to Good Girls Gotta Heal, the podcast where we learn to release the weight of childhood trauma and step into our most authentic selves. It's time to ditch that good girl mask and embrace a life of ease, compassion, and genuine connection. Join me, Megan Walsh, holistic trauma therapist, and let's embark on a journey of healing and self-discovery together. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Good Girls Gotta Heal. I am Megan, your host, and I am so excited today. We have Joe Nucci here with us, and Joe is an expert at breaking down how people talk about mental health. He is a fellow psychotherapist who corrects widely misused terms, adds valuable nuance, and explains complex ideas in ways that anybody can understand. And he is the author of Psychobabble. And Psychobabble was released out into the world just about a month ago, and I am so excited to talk more about it. So welcome, Joe. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, so excited to chat. And Joe and I we share an editor, and so very excited to have that connection, and I'm so grateful to have spoken to you before about the book writing process. But we are here to talk about you and this book. But what I would love to start with is if you could tell us all a little bit more about you, kind of your story and what led you to become a therapist and be where you are today.
Yeah, I'd love to. So for those of you who don't know me or who are familiar with me but don't necessarily know this part of my story, there are lots of reasons that I could name, like why did I become a therapist? How did I get here? The one I remember writing an essay for grad school, not the program I ended up attending, but the question was something like, why do you want to be like a psychologist or psychotherapist?
Mm-hmm.
And, you may not talk about your desire to help people or your desire to impact the world in a positive way. So they were obviously asking for a certain degree of self-disclosure.
Yes,
and I remember the answer I went with is I talked about being a big brother. I was 6 years old when my little brother was born. And so I'm 6 years old when I'm being told that I'm big, even though I'm very small, and I'm being rewarded for helping with caretaking and playing with him and being patient and being curious. Babies are so weird watching when you're a child, because I remember him from the day he was born, like just watching somebody grow up and go through all those developmental stages is certainly, I think, an impactful experience. But my mom tells this very charming story about how I was very young, and her and my dad were talking about something like parents and adults often do. And I get like a sticky pad like this for those listening. I'm like holding up just like kind of the basic sticky note. And I guess I would like watch it and I would like tally. And then I would like give them their tallies, and I don't know what I thought I was observing or whatever I was doing, but she tells me when I told her what I wanted to go to grad school for, she said, I always thought you would find this path, because I've always been a kind of a compassionate and sensitive guy, but also very like analytical.
Yeah.
And a little bit like detached in that way, like in a healthy way. And so
in a healthy way, yeah.
And so, yeah, I think, I don't know, I think part of it was probably just in the blood. When I finally got to grad school, I certainly kind of like developed I got more granular about what I was interested in, of course, but I was just excited to kind of soak it all in and learn everything by the time I got there.
Yeah. Oh, and so tell me, once you finished grad school, got out into, the real world and working as a therapist, who were you drawn to supporting? What kind of clients?
Well, it's funny because I remember in grad school, they made us read this paper. The takeaway of the paper was essentially that your clinical focus is going to be directly related to your internship and practicum experiences. And I remember thinking, not I. Like I will market to the proper, client or patient that I want to treat, and I will go forth and prosper on my own terms. But it's funny because I got a lot of supervision around couples, and I got a lot of supervision around what we might call adult children of dysfunctional family dynamics. And sometimes people hear me describe that as a specialty and they go, oh, so everyone? And I go, no, not everyone. Like actually very specifically not. I think that a mental health myth, it's not explicitly in the book, but maybe it's something that could be fun to talk about, or at least make future content about, or like a future chapter. Is I think that everybody believes that their family drama is really unique. And I think you and I, from the perspective our profession affords us, is that we can actually separate a little bit. Like, oh, like this seems like normal stuff that you hear from everyone. And this is actually like, I haven't heard this one before. Like this is actually like pretty unique, pretty intense. And so let's talk about it. It doesn't make it, better or worse, just worth naming. And so those are still my specialties to this day. I think just by the nature of being a man, I treat a lot of men. of all
Mhm.
sexualities,
Yeah.
but that's kind of been an informal maybe specialty. And then my practice is completely virtual these days, and so I tend to attract very like busy working professionals. So it's
Mhm.
like this is the 1 hour a day they have. They barely have time to commute to the office, let alone get on with me, but when we make
Right.
it work. We make it work. So
Yeah.
I have a lot of thoughts on
Absolutely.
virtual therapy, and I'm a big fan personally.
Yeah, ditto. I mean, my whole practice is virtual as well. And while I would love to have, in-person sessions, it does make it just so much more accessible, so more feasible,
Totally.
so much more doable. So I'm right there with you in it. And so tell me too about, so you are doing your practice and then you blow up on social media. Tell me about what that was like for you, and what drew you to sharing and teaching on social media as a therapist.
So I was being encouraged by people in my life to like make content before we even had like the term for content creator. People would be
Mhm.
like, you should make YouTube videos. Like
Yeah.
people were kind of pushing me in this direction. They're like, why don't you want to do it? And I remember I had the same answer every time. And the answer was, I don't want to do it because cringe. I was like, because I literally never ever want to do that. And, be careful what you
Uh-huh.
make such black and white
I
declarations
know.
around, I guess, is like
Mhm.
the
So
jokes that
true.
life will play on you. But I knew that I wanted to impact more people than just working in a
Mhm.
private practice. I knew I wanted
Yeah.
to make more money, if I'm being
Mhm.
completely frank.
Sure.
And so, I mean, there was a time I thought about law school. I thought about PhD. I thought about maybe not practicing law, but like going into like policy and like advocating for the
Sure.
profession. There were all sorts of different things I explored. But have you ever had like experiences in life where it's like it's not that I was getting red lights for any of those paths, but there were no like green lights.
Yes. Oh,
Like
yes.
it just
Exactly.
seemed like the path of most resistance in a lot of ways. And I was just like, why
Mhm.
isn't this like clicking? And
Working.
so I don't know what came over me, but I was just like, you know what? I'm going to try it. I'm going to dedicate myself to it for a few months and just see what it's like. And just kind of,
Yeah.
the worst thing that will happen is not very many people see it. And then I
Sure.
stop. But my 14th video on Instagram got almost 1 million views before it
Mhm.
kind of fell off the
Wow.
algorithm. And it was about how you shouldn't believe everything you think, and
Mm.
how maybe not all thoughts come from a deeper place. And like, what does it
Huh.
mean to kind of discern that? And it
Yeah.
was really impactful for me. I mean, there's just the pure dopamine of that, just like the social media user or content creator
Mhm.
experience. But then there was
Sure.
also this realization of, let's say 1 million people watch it and only 1% of those people were actually helped. Like that was
Mhm.
like, okay, that was like an impactful thing. That's 10,000 people, and that's more people that I could treat in a whole career.
Yeah.
Not that one video
So
replaces
true.
therapy,
Yeah.
but I really just like saw the shot, and I started
Mhm.
cringing less. I started taking it way more
Mhm.
seriously and
Yep.
kind of learning like the game, if you
Yeah,
will.
of course.
And
Uh-huh.
here we are, like over, let's see, it's been about 2.5 years, 2.5
Wow.
years later.
Wow. Incredible. And I love that perspective of, even if 1% of these people that saw it had a really big takeaway and aha moment, really took
Mhm.
something, it is so worth it. And I'm right there with you with that feeling. It's cringy till it's not. And just what a big impact that you are making. And so I'm not surprised though that being the initial reel that blew up and I'm sure grew things for you. That it sounds like that might be the kind of the seed of the book. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah. Well, when I started taking it more seriously, I started, for anyone out there listening who's like interested in getting their start in social media, like a very
Mhm.
kind of well-known and basic strategy is like look at what is working well in your niche and replicate it. For an example, maybe somebody, is a baker and they want to like highlight the baked goods they're making. Well, it's
Mhm.
like go look at the videos that are getting millions of views of the
Mhm.
baked goods and like what are
Yeah.
they doing, and like figure out what your own spin off that is. And so I started absorbing a lot more self-help and mental health content, and to
Mhm.
my maybe even like chagrin, I guess you could say, there was this experience of, I was like, oh, like I don't actually agree with a lot of this. This is actually really weird as like a
Yeah.
professional to see. And it's not, but the thing that was weird about it is that these videos were very popular and the creators were
Mhm.
so popular. And
Mhm.
so I started criticizing those ideas. And it may be a video about trauma, for example. I remember
Mhm.
one that really popped off was the person's video was like, did you know that your personality is literally just a trauma response? And I forget
Mm.
what my exact take on it was, but I was like, "Did you know that is literally not true?" You know, and
Oh,
that's not even just
yeah.
oversimplified. That's just straight
Right.
up not true. There's so many things that go into developing personality, and I would actually say that trauma, I think the correlation is actually very weak as I understand it in terms of the personality
Mhm.
literature. So I was just like
Sure.
I was really concerned. I was very impacted by this book I read in grad school. I don't know if it ever came across your radar. Did you ever read Saving Normal? It's by Dr. Alan Francis,
I
who
have
used to work on the
not.
DSM. So his
Okay.
thesis is basically be careful not to pathologize everyday life and everyday experience, even negative
Yes.
experience.
Yes.
Because there are, I mean, and as I talk about in the book, there's just so many things that can go wrong with that. And that's really
Yeah.
the core of a lot of my content and the core of the book. People think that
Mhm.
it's sometimes people I think catch wind of my content or the book and they think that it's like I'm being just like critical or like I'm just trying to get like attention in today's competitive attention
Mm.
economy.
Mhm.
But for me, it's not this finger wagging, like that's not the correct definition of gaslighting. For me, it's actually a much more serious problem. You're misusing this term gaslighting. And in addition to being wrong, you are
Mhm.
making decisions about how you conduct yourself in your relationships that is actually antithetical to your mental health, to the dynamic of the
Right.
relationship. It's actually
Yeah.
harmful, I would argue, in a lot of ways. And
Mhm.
so that's why it needs to be talked about. And let's be
Right.
clear, this is a good problem to have. If there's multiple competing perspectives like in a cultural discourse, then that subject area is decidedly not as stigmatized as it once
Yeah.
was. And it keeps
Absolutely.
it in people's consciousness.
Yeah. And I love that you're bringing this, like, let's challenge these things. Like, let's challenge all the information that we're taking in, especially from a mental health content. We need to have critical thinking and to
Yes.
really look look deeper because of course there's critical thinking in today's society is quite a challenge at times. And so I'm so curious. You have so many, how many myths exactly? I see 40 myths
Yes.
in the book. And there, I mean, there we could, I would love to talk about each and every one of them, but would love to dive in to learn a little bit more. And before we dive in, actually, I want to ask, since the book has been out a month, which myth do you feel you get asked about the most?
I think that I probably get asked about a relationship myth. So
Hmm.
there's like whether it's like the love bombing or like my ex was a narcissist. It's
Hmm.
like something with
Yeah.
relationships.
Hmm.
Sometimes I think ADHD is a popular one. Stuff about diagnosis is incredibly popular. But it kind of depends on who I'm talking to. It's funny. I don't know if it's like you've gotten familiar with my content in the book, like if you like really like strongly agree or disagree, but it's kind of funny because it's like internet versus reality. Like on the internet, my stances on like trauma discourse are like quote unquote controversial. But I had an event to promote the book where it was all therapists around the table and everyone was like, we love what you have to say. And it was
Yes,
all these
of
like
course.
trauma therapists. And so it's just kind of
Yes.
funny sometimes the contrast where I'm like, oh, heck.
Right. Right. No, totally. And as a
Yeah.
trauma therapist, I'm like, yes, yes, this is because it's the nuance, right? I think we need to speak to the nuance. And actually you have me thinking more deeply about how can I bring more nuance to how I present information online. I think it's so, so important because it's one thing, to be seen and to feel seen and to feel like, oh, whoa, actually, I have some more context to why certain things are challenging for me or why in relationships. I'm not surprised that the relationship ones come up the
Yes.
most because that's where we all have our biggest stressors and anxiety. It's all relational. And so I think the more that we have the nuance there in terms of course, why maybe something that could be why I am the way I am, but really being specific about what is characterized as trauma or not. And I know for me, and from a childhood trauma lens, so much of it is it's misattunement versus trauma and really being able to flesh that out. So I love everything that you have to say. I think it's so important. And I speak to a lot of clients and people who, right, narcissism is totally a word that is thrown around so much, right? My parent was a narcissist. My dad was a narcissist. He was totally a narcissist. Tell me more about the narcissist myth and
Yeah.
how people should begin to think more deeply on it.
Yeah, let's double click on the narcissism one. So, something that I write about in the book is I think that a lot of the creators who write about narcissism, narcissistic abuse, etc., they do this really interesting thing where they say on one hand, well, I'm not talking about the personality disorder. I'm not talking
Mm,
about narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. I'm not talking about
hmm.
NPD, but the personality trait of narcissism it is evil or maladaptive, it is fixed, it is taking place like no matter what you do, and like you need to cut these people off and like all this stuff. And so, but when I hear that definition, I'm like, oh well, that's actually like the definition of a personality disorder. And so I'm kind of like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like you can't
Yeah.
be like, I am not using diagnostic criteria
Mm,
to interpret like a general population or this general construct and then describe it like it's pervasive in a fixed trait. Like you're not allowed to do that. I take issue with
right.
that ethically.
Right.
But then I
Mm-hmm.
think when you get into the nuances of it, what I think a lot of people say by narcissist, what they often mean is emotionally mature,
Mm-hmm.
selfish,
Yeah.
grandiose, perhaps
Mm-hmm.
somebody who likes to
Sure.
play the victim, if you want to emphasize
Mm-hmm.
the kind of like vulnerable narcissist
Right.
subtype. What do you think about this? Because this isn't something I touch on in the book. What I talk about in the book is I say, there's kind of like insecure coping and grandiose coping. So for those
Mm-hmm.
listening or watching, insecure coping is like in a breakup, like, oh, poor me, I messed it up. I'll never get this right. I'll never find love.
Right.
I'm not good enough. Versus the
Mm-hmm.
grandiose is a little bit like, don't they know how lucky they were? Like, don't
Yep.
they know who I
Yep.
am? And like both are actually very normal,
Yeah.
um,
Yes.
without
Totally.
being narcissistic. But something
Right.
I don't say in the book, I'd love to know what you think, because I've been talking about this a little bit more. I think that there's this contrast that happens in breakup where let's say you and I are dating and like you are just my
Mm-hmm.
perfect sweet baby girl angel light of my life, to go
Mm-hmm.
from that
Yeah.
like the ecstasy of the passion and the overwhelming like
Mm-hmm.
nurturance, to go from that to being single, and that transition is so hard on anyone,
Hard.
that just the contrast alone, I think that your ex is going to seem narcissistic by contrast, because all of a sudden, like, I don't care
Yeah.
about all the subtleties of your feelings. I'm not paying attention like
Yeah.
I once did. And part of me, that's where I
Mm-hmm.
think the myth comes from. I think
Yeah.
it's easy to elevate it to that level when it's not
Definitely.
actually the case.
Right. It's so true. And likely what was happening is that in our relationship, you were probably having feelings that you weren't maybe expressing. And maybe you were holding those in for a long time. And again, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you're a narcissist. It just means that communicating about it was really hard because you were probably afraid how I was going to take it. And are we totally playing out a relationship that happened in my 20s? Yes, we are. Because I definitely had that experience of boyfriend in my 20s who everything was great. We were literally making like big plans for me to move across the country, whole thing. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it was done. And in my early 20s, I definitely had that grandiose coping of like, oh, and he's totally going to regret doing this. And honestly, it was just the way that, again, doesn't mean that I was narcissistic, but it was the way I was trying to make sense, right, of this
Mm,
this big rupture that did not, right? There was no
yeah.
communication around repair. There was no real healthy communication around what led up to it. And it's just the absence of that communication, the absence of the information for my sense of self to make sense of what
Yeah.
happened and why, right? Like the
Right.
feeling like it happened in an instant, right? It's so startling.
Yeah. Well, Nancy McWilliams, I remember in grad school watching this lecture where she's talking about defense mechanisms or defense
Hmm.
processes. And she's talking about how, like, they're not good or bad. They simply are. And the example
Hmm.
she uses in a breakup, it is normal to split. It is normal to view them for a period
Yeah,
as all bad,
totally.
right? And
Yeah.
yourself is all good. And I have personally noticed, not that people can't break up in a very intentional and compassionate way, but I have
Hmm.
seen breakups go awry, not because they were messy and nasty, but because they consciously uncouple and they keep in touch. And then it's
Oh
like
yeah.
3 years later and they're still having big feelings about it. And it's just kind
Uh-huh.
of like, I think
Sure.
there's an advantage and disadvantage to every strategy. And sometimes I think I'm okay with normalizing, like, yeah, breakups are hard. Sometimes stuff is said that is inappropriate and unwarranted,
Hmm.
but maybe
Yeah.
we can give everyone a little bit of grace.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's so true, right? Again, the nuance around what is actually happening in that really big emotionally charged moment. Exactly.
Right. Totally. Well, I'm also something else I write about the narcissism thing in the book is it's kind of
Hmm.
like, I sometimes I feel like as a culture, like we've just gotten a little too sensitive. And I
Mm.
think that's because, from a mental health perspective, if you're feeling depressed or you have an eating disorder or like the trauma symptoms, like feeling your
Hmm.
feelings is curative. Like you haven't been
Hmm.
feeling them and you need to let your body process them. But that doesn't mean
Yeah.
that in your day-to-day life, the most adaptive thing to do is to just feel your feelings all the time and to expect that everybody else will then like reposition and reorient themselves to them. Like that's
Love it.
actually like the opposite of
Yeah.
health is what I would say. And so I think
Yeah.
that's part of it too, where someone's like, oh, that person's
Right.
narcissistic because they weren't like overly sensitive to my feelings. I'm just like, I
Hmm.
don't buy that. I also think that too, that, trait narcissism, if we're going to talk about it this much, let's get into the nuance. Like, let's talk about how it can be adaptive in some cases. Like you want the leader or the surgeon, the firefighter, maybe to maybe not, you don't want them to have NPD, you don't want them to be
Hmm.
overcompensating for a deficit, but
Sure.
like you
Yeah.
maybe want them to have some shared traits. You might want a little bit of superiority, you may want a little less empathy, if you're running into a burning building or if you're cutting someone open on a
So
table because
true.
you're a surgeon. Like a
Yeah.
ton of empathy isn't going to be necessarily super adaptive, and so I think
Sure.
we should
Sure.
think about those things.
Right. And how all of
Yeah.
these, right, do come from right, they're protector parts. They come from protective
Yes,
places. And so
exactly.
getting curious about that and having compassion towards that, I think
Hmm.
is so important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
want to talk too about because Good Girls Gotta Heal is the title of this podcast. So many listening will self identify as a people pleaser. So
Mm.
tell me more about your myth on people pleasing in the book.
Yeah, I actually just gave a talk on this at a
Hmm.
university campus. And one of the things I said to them is, I'm like, look, like the reason why this is one of the psychobabble terms I like to pick on is not
Hmm.
because it's not a real phenomenon. I just think it's such an umbrella term that I don't
Hmm.
find it helpful. Because if
Hmm.
somebody goes to see you or me for people pleasing, the first question out of our mouths is going to be, what do you mean by that? Are you an approval seeker? Do you not know how to
Sure.
handle conflict? Are you a martyr? Do you like to
Hmm.
self-sacrifice?
Yep.
Are you, whatever it is? But then I think for a lot of people, they're highly agreeable in their personalities, and conflict really drains them. And the advice of like, you shouldn't back away from conflict ever, or, you should never please anyone if it's not what you want to do. I don't think that that is good advice for every nervous system.
Hmm.
I have some friends that are litigators, that are attorneys,
Mm.
and I'll like be out at dinner with them or something, and I'll be like, "Oh, like I read this interesting study that you might like," and they'll be like, "Here are 6 reasons why your study is flawed." Like, because they argue
Sure.
for a living and
Yeah.
they thrive
Right.
on it. It energizes them. I
Hmm.
say that to a friend who is also a shrink, and it's just kind of like, they, without even realizing it, right? They're validating it first,
Yes.
and then they're
Yep.
kind of coming in like
Hmm.
it's just
Yeah.
it's different strokes, different folks. And
Yeah.
I don't think that this idea that it's like, oh, like it is always bad to like please the people in your life is I
Yeah.
don't think it makes
Sure.
sense. What do you
Right.
think about this? Because I've been thinking a lot about this in the context of just like being in like a loving, healthy relationship. Um,
Hmm.
a myth, and I really address this in the book, but I'm thinking
Hmm.
about like making more content about this.
Yeah.
There's this myth out there that it's a healthy relationship. They should just love you exactly for who you are. Like they should just
Mm-hmm.
like you. And there is something true about that. But the reason why things are myths are not because they're not true. It's because the
Right.
truth gets wrapped in some sort of like ideology or bias,
Yeah, exactly.
and
Yeah.
it actually obscures what the truth is. Because
Right.
I find that in a healthy, loving relationship, whether it's like with a romantic partner or even a friend, I am
Hmm.
called to change myself for the
Mm.
relationship. Like, I
Hmm.
may let you pick where we go out to dinner, or
Yeah.
I may actually reconsider my own beliefs about
Yeah.
politics or God or like whatever it is, because I
Hmm.
respect you and your opinion. And I want to accept your influence. Like accepting influence is
Right.
like a form of like love and respect.
Yes, it's
And it's
true.
just like funny to me that I think that that gets totally obscured by the people pleasing conversation.
Yes. Yes. Oh, you're so right. You're so right. And I will say I am one that probably in my content at times have said the phrase, right? You deserve to be loved exactly as you are. And really when I say that, I'm of course speaking to the inner child in everybody, right? The inner child who needed more emotional attunement and holding, to know that they were loved exactly as they were.
Yeah.
But you make such an excellent point that when it comes to your adult relationships, yeah, it is true to a sense, but you need to make room and space for the communication around different needs. Around when you said that, it made me feel really, really upset and not seen and validated. So, of course, when I say that to you, right, you're going to take that in and you're going to think, okay, you know what, I am going to shift how I
Yeah.
communicate, right? I am going to be more intentional, right? And that shift
Yeah.
is a beautiful thing because it is in service of the
Yeah.
relationship itself.
Totally. Yeah, and you know what's funny, and I do write about this in the people pleasing chapter in the book. It's like, who is so like people pleasing in energy are therapists.
Oh
And
my god.
report feeling quite emotionally close and comfortable
Huh?
to their therapist. Now, of course,
Yeah.
we don't want it to be codependent. We don't want it to be enabling, like,
Mhm.
et
Mhm.
cetera, right? Like,
Right.
again, that's where that like balance comes in. But I just think
Mhm.
it's kind of funny that like
Yeah.
the code to be like mentally healthy is like, don't be a people
Yeah.
pleaser. And yet I'm not totally sure therapists are always practicing what they preach.
Oh my god,
You know what I
absolutely
mean?
not. Yeah. Oh, it's so true.
So
It's so true. And
yeah.
and I've actually like there have been times in my role as a therapist who tends to lean, on the people pleasing side of things where I have gotten the feedback because I love to invite feedback because in any relationship, whether it is your romantic relationship or your therapeutic relationship, right, you should have a safe space to say, "Hey, this is what's working, this is what's not." And oftentimes I will say I want, I want a little bit more, a little less validating, right? All my feelings, and maybe a little bit more directness or a little bit more, yeah, maybe a little bit more kind of calling me out essentially. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's great. That is great feedback because again, it's
Hmm.
telling me about what you need and actually is making me
Yeah.
say, what about this is actually, why is that not coming out in me? Like that's mine to
Yeah.
examine, right? In my own supervision, of
Yeah.
course.
Totally. Yeah. How do you balance it though? Because I'm fairly uncomfortable with empathic confrontations in session. Like they're kind of my bread and
Hmm.
butter. But one
Yeah.
way I've grown as a practitioner is learning when to give that, like whether it's requested or when
Hmm.
it's just like clinically appropriate and the timing
Yeah.
is right.
Right.
But sometimes I find that really what's most healing for people in a therapeutic relationship is just the safety to make mistakes, or like sometimes
Yeah.
like maybe if you think of like a substance misuse case, like not like relapse where it's like they need to get sent to rehab, but it's like,
Hmm.
oh, they didn't meet their goals quite as they articulated them, but just had the safety of it's like, and it's okay, like, and I'm going to see you next week and let's talk
Right.
about it,
Of
and I
course.
still believe in you.
Hmm.
And like it's not like
Right.
the line is so hard for me to find. I don't know how you like figure out like which one to lean into at different times, but
It's so true. I
it's
mean, but I
tricky.
think, yeah, I think owning that, naming that, right? Because again, I can say, sure, I will name something more directly, but it's always going to come from the framework of right? What it's okay,
Hmm.
right? I support you. I am here for you. I'm not here to judge or criticize you. And if
Yeah.
you're wanting that, let's explore that, right? Let's explore where that
Hmm.
comes from and why you're expecting that and why it feels like an
Yeah.
absence if I'm not, right? If I'm not giving that to you. So of course, it's all
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
information to use
Uh-huh.
inside of the session. So,
Yeah.
so interesting. But this also brings us to, I'm so curious about the more emotional intimacy, the better. Tell me more
Mm.
about that one because as someone who I'm
Yeah.
like, I probably believe the more emotional intimacy, the better. So, yeah, I would love to hear more about
Yeah.
that.
Well, so I'll just use myself as an example,
Mhm.
right? I'm in a very loving relationship, one that is very intimate.
Mhm.
And there are sometimes thoughts I have. Maybe it's from an anxiously attached place, or maybe it's from a
Mhm.
place where I'll have moments where I'm unsure. I'm just like, oh, that was weird. Like, did I like, have I like misjudged like the kind of
Yeah.
person you are? Like,
Right.
because, it doesn't matter how long you've been with someone. I really believe like you're constantly getting to know them, just like we're
Of
constantly
course.
getting to know
Yeah.
ourselves. And I don't think it is mature or adaptive or like healthy from like like a couples therapy perspective for me for me to have no filter, right?
Mhm.
It would be
Mhm.
more intimate if
Sure.
they knew all of the little feelings that came up. But as you and I know, sometimes our feelings need to be disclosed and processed to
Mhm.
our partner. And sometimes our nervous system is just making guesses based on the
Yeah.
data we
Yeah.
have. And the feelings
Sure.
like aren't actually like worth listening to or
Mhm.
like putting that much stock in. And like you should just kind of
Mhm.
like let them pass. I also, something I talk about when this chapter comes up is let's not talk about intimacy like it's this unidimensional
Mhm.
dynamic.
Mhm.
The kind of intimacy I have with my therapist, which is the kind of intimacy where I can talk about like, well, what if I didn't settle down with this person?
Mhm.
Or what
Yeah.
if I, had a different life? Or maybe for any of those listening, like maybe
Right.
what if I didn't have kids? What if I chose this different job? Like these are really normal things to wonder with. And I think
Yeah.
therapy is an amazing space to explore this. Would I recommend you talk to your kids like that? No. And I don't think I'm saying anything groundbreaking,
Yeah.
and I'm
It's
not,
so
and I
true.
don't think I'm straw manning either, because I think it really
Mhm.
depends on the kind of relationship you want to have.
Mm.
Some parents are very, very close with their kids, and sometimes those kids come to therapy completely emotionally enmeshed with mom or
Mhm.
dad, and it's
Yeah.
actually
Oh,
not that
yeah.
healthy. You know
No.
what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
Some partners want to know everything about your past and your mistakes and your
Mm.
traumas, and
Yeah.
accepting you in that is how they show love.
Mhm.
maybe it increases eroticism between you two.
Sure.
Other
Of
people,
course.
too much of that familiarity can actually decrease eroticism. And if
Mm.
sexuality is something that you want to prioritize in your
Yeah.
intimate relationship, maybe the best thing you can do is not to say that you should know nothing about your past, but to kind of take the viewpoint. And I've treated couples like this and I've known them where it's like,
Mm.
listen, your past is your past. I'm interested in your present. I'm interested in
Mhm.
your
Yeah,
future. Like I'm interested, and like
exactly.
that is a whole different kind of intimacy and a kind of relationship
Mhm.
that you can have. You know, sexual
Yeah.
intimacy is not recommended with your therapist. You know, it's also illegal and
Definitely
unethical for
not.
anyone
Yes.
listening. And so
Completely.
like again, it's just like, so I guess like the takeaways are that first of all, there's different flavors, and two, it's like I think
Mhm.
sometimes there's when there's too much of it, I think that where that ends and where codependency or enmeshment or losing your sense of self in the other. We
Yeah.
were talking about how beautiful it is to accept influence from other people, but
Sure.
that can't come at the expense of maintaining individuality as well. And I think in the art of intimacy, that can be incredibly tricky. I also think that intimacy is great, like vulnerability is great, like if you can handle it going wrong.
Yeah.
You know, did you
Such a good
ever
point.
read in grad school Schopenhauer's Porcupines?
No, no, you're giving me such
It's
great
what's
book
the
recommendations.
psychoanalyst? It's a Deborah like Lupinitz, maybe. I think I'm butchering her last name,
Mhm.
but the point is they talk about how the porcupine is this metaphor for human intimacy and
Mm,
how
mhm.
when storms
Yeah,
come in life, and storms will always come in your life,
sure will.
porcupines huddle together for closeness. But the
Mm.
closer porcupines get, what happens? The more likely they are to accidentally hurt each other with their
Yes. Ooh.
quills. And so like, yes, like be intimate with the person you're
Yeah.
dating, be intimate, but it's like if it goes wrong, if they
Mhm.
use it against you, you know, not because they're, you know, an evil narcissistic psychopath, but maybe they're
No.
feeling defensive, right? Like,
Mhm.
can you
Yeah,
handle that?
right.
You know, and so I'm a skeptic. I'm a skeptic on the like
Sure.
more is more is more. I think that there's all these
Of
factors that we
course.
need to consider.
Yes. No, it's so
Yeah.
true. So much nuance, so much, again, so much work because, especially because our relationships are these giant mirrors of our own, right?
Yeah.
Our own stuff that needs to be processed, our own wounds.
Yeah.
And we have to be willing to lean into the discomfort because on, I always say this, like on the way to like the relationships that genuinely feel warm and cozy, it doesn't come without the porcupine needles. Like you have
Of
to
course.
learn how to
Yeah.
comfortably lean into that.
Right. Well, I'm a really big Brene Brown fan, and everyone knows
Mm-hmm.
her for how she has culturally just like reframed vulnerability and intimacy and shame. But I think she doesn't often get quoted enough for something that she also says in all of her talks and appearances, which is not everyone is entitled to your
Mm-hmm.
story. And she talks
Yes.
about
Yes.
how you really just need one person.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Yeah.
she doesn't specify that it has to be your partner. You
Yeah.
know, it can
Right.
be your
It's so true.
therapist. It can be,
Right.
you know, there's a certain kind of intimacy I have with some of my best friends that like it's just different
Mm.
from how I would
Yeah.
talk to my partner. And like I alluded to earlier, maybe it's because it's about my partner,
Yeah.
right? Or about my
Exactly. Of
child or like whatever it
course.
is. And that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. You can make room
Mm-hmm.
for all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It reminds me of Esther Perel's, how she talks about how,
Hmm.
right, our partner, we can't expect them to meet every single need that we have. We have to have intimacy and connections outside of it. So, so
Yeah.
important. Well, I'm so curious. So let's say everybody's listening and they hear the myths, they read your book, they order your book, they read it, and they say, I hear these myths. Now what? So what would be the first step you would invite someone to do after
Yeah.
listening to this episode?
Yeah. Well, I would say that two things. The easy one is obviously feel free to check out like my book, my content, my
Hmm.
page. I'm
Yeah.
busting many more myths in the book or adding that
Good.
valuable nuance that I think makes them applicable. But I also offer the following takeaways for people. One is which, and I think this works for almost any subject, but it definitely works for mental health. It's like a logical, almost like game. And the saying is if it's a dog, it's always a mammal. But if it's a
Mm.
mammal, it's not always a dog. So if they're a narcissist, they're always going to be selfish, you know? But if they're
Yeah.
selfish, they're
Yeah.
not always a narcissist,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
If it's ADHD, they're always going to be distracted. They're going to have, issues with, focus and attention and stuff. But if you're having issues with focus and attention, that doesn't always mean
It's
it's 80. And I think that that's like, I think just it's a simple one, but it will
hmm
really help you weave through so much. And I think that
hmm
short form content, it's some of it isn't always on the creator. Some of it is it's just how much nuance can you pack in 90 seconds? I mean, I've made my whole brand about that. And let me tell you,
Yeah,
I don't bat 100 either. Like it's difficult.
sure.
Like it's really, really difficult to
Yeah,
avoid
it
all the
is.
whataboutisms and the stuff like that. And so
Yeah.
yeah, that's probably what I would
But I
say.
love that, right? Because we can model that, right? We're human and we're going to be imperfect and we get to own
Yeah.
that and name that and we get to try again. So I love that. I mean, those are such powerful takeaways. I know I'm going to hold those with me as we move
Thank
ahead.
you.
And so please let everybody know how they can find you if you have anything else that you are offering in addition to the book.
Yeah, so Joe Nucci, that's like Gucci with an N as in Nancy, Nucci. Joe Nucci Therapy on all the social media. I'm most active on Instagram, but through that link or through my website, joenuccitherapy.com, you can see like the Substack. I've been focusing more on Substack and YouTube these
Mhm.
days. And the book Psychobabble, Viral Mental Health Myths and the Truths That Will Set You Free is available wherever books are sold.
Awesome. Well, I have it. I'm going to hold it up because I have it right here. And I
Great.
am so, so happy to have it and to use it and to share it because I think it
Yeah.
is so important for all of us.
Totally, yeah. And on my website, if you've purchased the book, I think you just enter like the order ISBN number or something, and
Hmm.
you can download a conversation guide, and it's for adolescents and parents to
Love
talk about
that.
some of these terms. If any of you out there listening have teenagers, because listen, they're on TikTok and they're learning all these terms, and it could be
Sure
helpful. I
are.
don't know.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think we have plenty of listeners who are parents of teens here. So perfect. We will link all of that in the show notes for everybody to find. Absolutely. So Joe, thank you so much for giving us your time today. So happy to
Sure.
have you here and look forward to continuing this conversation.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Good Girls Gotta Heal. I am so grateful to have you in this community. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. That helps us out greatly. And we'll see you next time.